If you found yourself working for a toxic boss or in a bad company, you know how detrimental that can be to your career. That's why recovering from a toxic workplace is so important. And in this video, I'm going to share with you how you can do it. Hey everybody, it's Brian from Life After Layoff, and today I want to share with you how to recover from a toxic workplace. Chances are you're probably going to end up in at least one toxic workplace in your career. I've experienced them myself, and it can really take the wind out of your sails. And if you're not careful, you can derail your career very easily. And mental health is something you should certainly be taking very seriously, and nothing like a toxic workplace to really negatively impact that. And if you're sitting here wondering if you're working for these types of companies, I made another video describing some of the signs that you should pay attention to. So check that video out first. But the fastest way to recover from a toxic workplace is to start to reclaim your power and control. And that's exactly why I created this free weekly newsletter. And in it, I share concise, actionable tips on how to treat your career with more strategy, how to approach your job search, resume writing, and interviewing with a higher degree of authority, and ultimately how to reclaim control and act like the CEO of your career. Keep in mind, it's absolutely free, and I hope to see you there. I worked in a few toxic workplaces myself. However, I think I'm going to tell a little story about another person that I know that just got out of a toxic situation themselves, and unfortunately they had to go through a recovery process in order to get back their mojo.
I've lost my mojo.
Because listen, if you're not careful, one bad employer, one bad boss, or one bad workplace can set your career off on a tangent, and you can find yourself in a tailspin pretty quickly. So it's really worth identifying A, those toxic workplaces, and then B, pulling the cord as quickly as you can so that you can get into a better and healthier place. It's going to be better for your career as long as you do it strategically. So anyway, I know a person who was working for a major employer. You've heard of the name of the company. They're very, very well known. So this person quickly moved through the ranks over the first third of their career. They got promoted. They moved from individual contributor into a leadership position and then got promoted a couple layers up from there. And they had actually flagged him to move to another location to take on a director level role. But the problem was that the location wasn't consistent with his long-term career goal. And so he ended up leaving that company to go to a upstart. Now, this much smaller company that you might not have heard of is going through rapid growth, and they need him to come in and help them scale their business. And so because of his pedigree, because of the company that he'd worked for before, they were very interested in his profile, his background. It was a pretty easy sell to get him into the business. However, because it was a bigger job and he was moving from a kind of a smaller title at a bigger company into a bigger title at a smaller company, there were some obvious gaps. He hadn't been exposed to a couple critical things, but it wasn't a deal breaker. The hiring managers fully understood it, and they said, don't worry, we'll train you on it. We understand that you're not competent at these specific things yet. So he settles into his job and he starts building out his team and doing all the things that he was hired to originally to do. And then he finds himself working more and more closely with the senior executive staff. However, he gets to the point where he has to start producing the work that he already self-identified in the interview that he hadn't had exposure to. This is, again, keep in mind, this is the thing that his hiring manager and the people around him said, don't worry, we understand that you don't have competency in it, and we will give you kind of a pass here. We'll work with you on it. Well, they didn't work with him on it, and he started being made to feel like he was incompetent, and they would call him out in very public settings and all of this kind of stuff. And it really started to affect him. His confidence level started to go down, and the senior executive team, and in particular the boss's boss, seemed to have some sort of vendetta against his role, and whatever he would produce was never good enough for this boss. And he would call him out very publicly on his lack of competence on those specific things that the entire team knew that he didn't have exposure to yet. So all this did over time was chip away at his confidence. And you got to keep in mind, he was a high potential at a major corporation behind it, came in well regarded, and everybody was excited about it. And suddenly, over the course of a couple of years, he starts being made to feel like he's really not capable. And so his entire demeanor shifts. Suddenly, where he once was very confident, he was now second guessing all of his decisions, his ability to do the job, and he started thinking he was failing. And while the bosses were putting pressure on him, people on his team were also feeling the heat and started leaving in droves. And if you could read the Glassdoor reviews on this place, they were abysmal and consistent with what he was experiencing. Now, keeping in mind that he was at a director or junior director level, so this was pretty high up the food chain. So if you think at that level you don't deal with the crap, it actually happens all the way up the food chain. So long story short, as his demeanor changes, his personality starts to shift. He becomes a little bit more timid in his daily interactions. is spending more and more time at work trying to keep his head above water to please these impossible bosses, and starts to manifest things like anxiety. In other words, it was physically affecting him. So I told him, you need to get out of this organization. It's not doing you any good. And he said, well, I made this commitment to this business and I'm supposed to deliver on it. And besides, I'm failing at this job. There's no way I can go to another job and feel like I could be effective. And I actually stopped him and said, this is not about you being effective. This is about them being completely incompetent. And this job is making you prematurely age. So finally, after a period of time, he ends up leaving the organization for another company. And wouldn't you know it, a few months later, he finds himself back on the high potential list with this new company, and he's continuing his track up the ladder. So the moral of the story here is that sometimes you just find yourself in a bad situation with a bad boss that you just don't jive with. You will inevitably experience this at some point in your career. Every single one of us will. I have certainly done it myself. So you have to realize that not all fits are great fits. And even though you might be highly competent in what you do, somebody else in some point in your career is not going to resonate with what you do and how you hold yourself. And I've also come to the conclusion that in every organization, there are going to be certain people that just suck. They will throw you under the bus to get ahead. They'll be dishonest behind your back. They'll cause a ruckus. They'll make your life a living hell behind closed doors. So you just have to understand, it is not you, it is them. The next thing you have to do is remember your worth. You have to keep in mind that the company hired you for a reason. They saw some potential in you that you could solve one of their problems, and you came in with good intentions to do that. And for whatever reason, somebody in the organization just is toxic and torpedoed your career. And it doesn't mean that you're any less valuable. Other companies, other hiring managers, other bosses in your career have found you to be fully capable. It's just that this is not a good fit for you for whatever reason. There's a cultural mismatch. There's a personality mismatch, whatever you want to call it. There are going to be certain bosses that you don't jive with, but you have to maintain what your true worth is. And if one employer or one boss is not recognizing it, it doesn't mean that there's not another boss that will. But it is worth looking at the organization and the situation that you're in and try to understand what went wrong. Did you make a critical mistake at a certain juncture that you should own? Because we do have to take reflection and use it as a learning opportunity. And sometimes criticism, while it can be hard to listen to, especially from people that you don't really respect, oftentimes there is some truth at the highest level, but you have to be willing to cut through your emotions to hear it. But probably even more importantly, it's worth looking at, how did you let yourself get into this situation to begin with? Was it in the interview process and you ignored some obvious red flags? Or did they deceive you and put on a certain face in an interview? And then once you get into the day-to-day, it's a completely different personality that you're dealing with. But whatever it might be, it is worth trying to identify what it is so that you can avoid it going forward in the future, and perhaps ask more pointed questions in your interview. Because remember, we're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing us. And you need to use this as a learning opportunity, because obviously we don't want to repeat this going forward. But when you decide that you're going to leave, and you should in a toxic situation, because again, it's not good for your long-term health, especially if you're manifesting physical symptoms, it's affecting your family life, etc. But you need to take time to heal. So whether you decide to just leave without having another job lined up, which in some cases may be a viable strategy, of course, that's a very drastic one, but it could be a viable strategy in certain circumstances. Or if you have another job lined up, it might be worth trying to space out your start time so that you give yourself a little bit of a chance to heal. Because the healing process is going to be crucially important if you want to get back on track. If you just jump right into your next job without processing what has happened to you, you're likely to hold some of that baggage, and it could affect your new job. You don't want to torpedo yourself before you've even started. And if you decide to leave the toxic organization, it may also be worth upskilling at this point in time so that you can fill some of the gaps so that you don't repeat that same mistake. And not only that, having new skills can give you a higher sense of confidence that you'll be even more effective when you start another job. And while you're at it, I recommend trying to surround yourself with positive people. It can be very easy to get into a negative loop if you're in a toxic workplace and other people around you are feeling very toxic as well. They're gossiping, they're complaining and griping. And I mean, I'm the first to admit, I've been in situations where I have gotten sucked into those dramas and probably even said some negative things myself. But I've recognized that it's not always a positive loop, especially if you're somebody that's trying to stay on a certain career path towards a positive end result. So try to seek out those positive people, potentially even a mentor that might be able to help you navigate through the murky waters of your current situation, and then help you reclaim some of that confidence that you're missing. And when you do get back into the job search, I highly recommend that you be very intentional with your job search activities. In other words, We want to be very selective with the employers that we target. You might want to do that next level of due diligence. Go and check their Glassdoor. If you haven't done reverse references before, I highly recommend that you start doing them, and I can talk about that in another video. But we want to make sure that we are doing our due diligence with the hiring manager and with the company culture, and making sure that we're really paying attention to any possible red flags. I've also made some other videos about them. You should check them out as well when you're in an interview process, what to be looking for. Because we certainly want to target those better quality companies that support a healthy balance, better work culture, etc. And when you do land that new job, it is crucially important to get your mojo back as quickly as you can by getting some early wins.
Well, one thing's for sure, I've got my mojo back.
So go in and impress the boss quickly so that you get some of that praise and you get some of that positive, like that goodwill, that they feel good about the hire and they feel confident in you. Because when you feel the confidence coming from your boss and from your coworkers, it inspires you to do better work. And if you get inspired to do better work, it's a positive loop, kind of like the negative loop at a bad company. It's really interesting dynamic how that works. Now, if you're somebody that's found yourself in a very difficult situation and you're looking to make a change as quickly and authoritatively as possible, that is actually something that I specialize in. I do have a website called lifeafterlayoff.com, and it's loaded with tips and tricks, all from an insider's perspective. And I share my deepest and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses so that we can get you out of the toxic workplace and back into a better quality employer as quickly as possible. First thing you're going to need, though, is that resume, and you're going to need to make sure that it hits properly. And that's why I created the course called Resume Rocketfuel, which teaches you exactly how to write a resume from a recruiter's perspective that is going to give you the best chance of getting your profile noticed so that you can get into the first round interview. Once you get into the first round interview, it is up to you to market yourself effectively so that you can get through each stage, start to identify some of those red flags of those employers and those hiring managers so that you don't make the same mistake, and then ultimately get to the job offer. And that's where the ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp comes in. We start at job search and we go through each round of the interview process, breaking it down methodically, giving you tips and methodologies that you can ace the interview, and then ultimately help you negotiate the best possible job offer. So make sure that you check that out if you think you're struggling there. And then ultimately, the networking is going to be such a key component here, because you can leverage your networks to get out of bad situations quicker and even try to identify those toxic employers a little bit quicker as well. But you also want to be able to skip the recruiter and get your name right into the hiring ring. And that's where unlocking LinkedIn comes in. So if you're not sure how to leverage LinkedIn to look for a job authoritatively, I would highly encourage you to check out Unlocking LinkedIn. It's created especially for the job seeker who wants to unlock the hidden job market, skip the recruiter altogether, and start getting better quality opportunities. And if you really feel like you're dealing with the toxic situation and you just need somebody to walk through strategy here, that's something that I also do in the form of some one-on-one coaching sessions. So you can reach me through my website if you want to schedule one of those. Anyway, hopefully you're not dealing with too toxic of a situation. Make sure you work through that recovery process with a methodical strategy and you'll be just fine. Anyway, appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.